Hi, and welcome to the ACL Decoding Special Education series, where we take one topic, 5 slides, and no more than 5 minutes. Today, we're going to talk about the different ways that students can receive support in school and their public education. All students are entitled through FAPE, a free and appropriate public education. And we also know that all students don't learn the same way or learn at the same rate. So we need to have supports built into K-12 education. And you'll be happy to know that there are several ways to do that. All states have standards-based curriculum. They're developed by the states. And in that, there's usually the base level of the standards in a universal design. And that's what most students are able to access. Maybe 80%, there's not a hard line on that. But some students might need an accommodation. They might need specialized instruction. They might need access to therapy, such as speech therapy and other types of aids and technology in order to access their faith. There are three main ways we're going to talk about today for students to get that support. Okay. The first is multi-tiered systems of support. There are other names in other areas, but in our area, serving Boulder Valley School District and St. Vrain School Districts, the terms are MTSS. So MTSS is looking at a student who may be struggling and not quite where we want them to be, but they're not 2 or 3 years behind. They're maybe less than a year in terms of where their peers are. So we look at targeted instruction over a set period of time so we can determine whether that targeted instruction is enough to move them into closer to the average of their peers. This is not through special education. They are not part of this. This is through general education, particularly in elementary, but certainly into middle and even into high school. It might include a literacy coach if the area of need is around literacy, which is probably one of the most common, but it can also be around behaviors and other things too. It is not required to do this in order to get an IEP. Those are separate systems. I want to make that really clear to you. The second one, kind of in between MTSS and an IEP, is a Section 504 out of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 that levels the playing field for students with disabilities and health challenges that might make it a little harder for them to access their FAPE the same way that their peers are. Again, this is through general education and not special education. So it can include accommodations, which could be also on an IEP, but for right now, within a 504, often you're going to see testing accommodations, maybe moving to the library, distraction-free environment, using headphones, having more breaks, testing over several days instead of the same blocks of time that other students might be doing. Oral testing, it could also be things like breaking things into chunks, being much clearer about instructions, providing notes, creating opportunities for self-advocacy, and there's many more ideas. And then the third one, the one you're probably most familiar with, is special education. And inside of that is IDEA is the law that provides special education services, supports, and aids to students who require it in order to access their FAPE. So it includes specialized instruction, and that's one of the significant differences with a 504, which is only accommodations. And an IEP is going to have accommodations as well, and for a very small subset of students might also include modifications. There's a lot of legal requirements around this. There also are for 504s. MTSS have a lot more freedom inside of a district's decision on how they want to implement their MTSS, but IDEA has some very clear guidance, and the state requires guidance. So it can include an IEP is going to have that specialized instruction. It might have other related therapeutic services such as speech and language therapies, occupational therapy, might include nursing skills, and then other aids and supports, and particularly technology. So we see things like Google Read and Write being used, but it can also include switches, mobility devices, other things like that. So the idea is that that the student is then monitored through the system. There's an annual review of the IEP and the goals that have been developed based on much more assessment-based material. The first two are more informal assessments, by the school district, and an IEP is required that the district have formalized assessments in order to determine where the student is. They're going to all three include progress monitoring. That is essential. And if you're working with a team and aren't seeing, how do you know that the student is gaining the skills? Progress monitoring is where that is, the place where that is. How do you know that the student is doing well? So hopefully that gives you a sense of the many ways that students can get support in school so that they can access their faith.